Hi everyone, and welcome to another video. And today we're going to be talking about security groups. The reason why I bring up the security groups is because security groups are, I would say, an important part of securing your workloads in the cloud, specifically in AWS, but this will also apply to Google or Azure Cloud, and potentially any other cloud as well. The concept is quite simple. You basically create a security group for your application, and within the security group, you essentially define both inbound and outbound rules, and you basically specify, who can connect to this virtual machine, and what are the ports that they can use, the protocols that they're going to be able to establish or connect on, the IPv4 or the IP version, as well as the source configuration. In other words, where's the actual connection coming from? And this is kind of where I wanted to kind of highlight that particular area, in that when it comes to source address, you should never leave this address like this open to any IP address unless you know what you're doing or it's done for a purpose, because maybe you're providing access to maybe like a public website or something. But normally when you're deploying your applications, or when you're configuring or running your lab in the cloud, never configure the IP address to be any like this, or I should say never configure the source to be any. Always specify an IP address, preferably the IP address that belongs to you, that you use to connect to the virtual machine or to the console. And this will basically ensure that, it'll basically make it harder for somebody to access your virtual machine, because obviously if you're leaving it open using any IP address, you're basically saying that if this virtual machine over here has access or has a public IP address, well then technically speaking, anybody can just go here, access this virtual machine using the port 8080 that you permitted within your security group and access your instance. So I think the better practice would be to basically leverage security groups like this. However, instead of specifying any address, what we're going to do is we're going to specify our IP address, right? Our IP address that we use to connect to this instance. Now, if I were to basically customize using a specific IP address, so let's say I'm using what is my IP, and my IP address is this here. I'm actually just using a VPN service because I don't want to show you my real IP. But basically, if I add this IP address here and I save the rule, I'm still going to be able to access my Jenkins instance because that's my current IP address. So if I test this out right now, I'll copy this. I will open up a new tab, we'll append 8080, right? And now we have access to this virtual machine because I'm accessing this virtual machine on these ports using my own personal IP address, right? This is the IP address that I have here. If you compare, 45.14.195.64 is the same thing as the IP address here. Now, if I were to go back, right? So here I'm connected to the VPN client using NordVPN. But if I were to disconnect right now, then technically speaking, when I go back to my instance, and I try to connect to it, it should not work. Why? Because my personal IP address is different from my VPN's IP address. So if I do this again, as you can see, I'm actually not able to log in, right? And the reason why that is because I had basically set an IP address on a security group. And this prevented my machine from connecting because now my IP address changed. So if I want to, for example, enable access again, I can go back here, I can edit the rules, and I can remove these, maybe add again any, save the rule, right? So you can see this failed the first time, and now all of a sudden it refreshes and then it works on its own. So in other words, security groups play a very important part in securing your workloads, and I just want to make sure that you are employing this security mechanic when you're working with either in your lab or when you're deploying your applications in the cloud. So that's it for the video. I hope it was very helpful. Feel free to leave any comments. If there's any suggestions, I'm always open to suggestions, and see you on the next one.